All right, so another mini lecture here. This one will probably be a little shorter than the deduction one. Induction is maybe a little bit more familiar to you as a concept because it's similar to what you do have been done in essays for a long time. So induction is generalizing and making conclusions based on empirical evidence. Empirical evidence means something you observe in the world. And here are a couple examples from the Kaepernick article. But it was equally clear that many people agreed with Trump. According to an HBO Marist poll, 47% of Americans thought athletes should be required to stand during the anthem. 51% believe no rule should exist. So, there's some statistics there. Those statistics, that's empirical evidence based on having talked to people, surveyed them, and found out this evidence, which you then use to draw a conclusion, which is what it says many people agreed with Trump. All right, another example. David McCraw, owner of the Palmetto Restaurant and Ale House in Greenville, South Carolina, stopped showing NFL games in September in his own protest, and then says he watched business rise 20% the following month. So we've got the experience of this one restaurant owner and how his business fared, and then we're using that evidence to support the conclusion isn't stated here, but it's sort of implied that some people liked that he wasn't showing NFL games anymore. Another one. Collins trying to reach the far ends of this world, says John Carlos, a former track and field star whose famed Black Power salute at the 1968 Olympics prompted a similar backlash. And there we have testimony from an important figure, someone who did a similar protest in the 1968 Olympics. So inductive reasoning always uses what's called a sample. A sample can be lots of different things, and we'll see many different kinds of samples here. So take a second to read this slide and try to figure out what is the sample in this example here. So if you get to paragraph 3, it says inmates in 24 cells were allowed to spend 40 minutes a day alone, blah, 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 and inmates in 24 other cells on the other side of the cell block were given the same access to an identical room but without the videos. So there are 48 inmates in 48 cells. That is our sample. So the sample is the group of people or the group of things that we are looking at to draw a conclusion. And in that case, it's people in 48 cells. Let's look at another example. What's the sample here? Okay, if you get to the second box, it says researchers followed 52 participants for 6 months and found that in people with type 2 diabetes, nutritious diets, etc. So here we have a sample of 52 participants, and for a major health study, that's not a lot. That's not a lot of people. So as you can see in the second paragraph near the bottom there, it says the study was too small to conclusively determine if the diets resulted in improved long-term diabetes control, which tells us something important. Samples have to be reliable samples depending on what kind of conclusion you want to make. If you want to make a conclusion that healthy diet can benefit people with HIV and type 2 diabetes, you need a larger sample. All right. Okay, so there are many different kinds of evidence available to you. We have experimentation, which is like that prison study where they conduct an experiment and there's there's a sample within that experiment that they use. Or there are examples, real events, the sales from that bar. That's just one bar, but it's a small sample, but that's still worthwhile in this case, right? Invented instances or scenarios, we'll see an example of that. Analogies, John Carlos So John Carlos is that a 1968 a protester from the Olympics, and we're drawing an analogy between Colin Kaepernick and John Carlos. Expert testimony, he's also expert testimony. Statistics, we had the 51%, 47%, the prison study. So those are all different kinds of evidence available to you with inductive reasoning. So with statistics, it's worth mentioning a few things. You want to be really careful when you see that 47%, 51%. What does that mean? Where does that come from? How many people were studied? There's a really good short little section on page 104 in the book on statistics and what the danger of unreliable statistics. So have a look at that. Look at source documents when possible. Google helped me find the source for the this poll that was mentioned that says right here that 51% now say professional. This is the source for that poll. So it was pretty easy for me to find this, and that gives me a lot more information about that poll. There's a checklist on page 105 that you can look at, and this is important. Really only use data in your writing, your own writing, if you feel confident in it. And if you can't feel confident, don't use it. All right, so let's look at some more examples here. So this is from an article that you could choose to write about in next week's rhetorical analysis essay if you want. And the example is, for example, Joshua Landy, professor in French language, literature, and civilization at Stanford University, finds a laptop-free zone conducive to more engaged teaching experiences. So his experience is real. That's a real event, and that event sort of helps us understand this issue. It's not totally reliable, but it's one experience that could be valuable to us. Or we have a scenario. Okay, let's look at this one. So this is from an article, Wealthy Male American Students Are More Likely to BS, study says. Schur says that she is interested in determining whether a person's ability to BS has a major impact on economic inequality between men and women and how the ability plays out across socioeconomic lines. You can imagine that the people that score high on this bullshit index are good at certain things that might be rewarded. It might be an interview to get into college. It could be an interview for a job or an internship. So in this case, is the author talking about someone in particular that has taken been on an interview to get into college? No. We're imagining it. It's a scenario that we're being invited to imagine. That can be a kind of evidence too. Okay. Or analogies. Go back to Colin Kaepernick. We have this. Harry Edwards says he's the Muhammad Ali of his generation. So that's an analogy that is drawing this connection between Muhammad Ali. Now, something important to talk about. We have correlation versus causation. So correlation is when two things are related to each other. Causation, or not related, when they are happening at the same time. Causation is when one causes the other. And it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between those two things. Let's look at this. So Facebook, number of active Facebook users rose a lot between looks like about 2008 and 2011. So does that, at the same time, we have the euro rising greatly at that, or the yield on 10-year Greek government bonds. So, okay, is there a relation between these two things? They happen at the same time, but that doesn't mean they're related, right? That's really important, okay? Or Internet Explorer is in the green there. This old browser, right? The market share dropped a lot between 2006 and 2011. Also, the murders in the US dropped a lot. Looks pretty similar, right? So it must mean that Internet Explorer was causing murder. No, of course not. No, these two things happened at the same time, but that doesn't mean they're connected. Let's look at this one. Ice cream sales and shark attacks both spike during the month of July, so that must mean that ice cream causes shark attacks. No, of course not. There's another cause here. In this case, what's the cause? Well, people eat ice cream when it's warm. People get in the water when it's warm, right? So that actually they're correlated, but they're not in a relationship of causation to each other. All right, here's a tricky one. Okay, so here we have um, the global temperature rising and carbon dioxide rising. Okay, this is a much more serious one, of course. So this is about global warming. And this shows very clearly the temperature is rising. It shows that carbon dioxide is rising at the same time. And the great majority of scientists, of course, accept that there is a relationship of causation between carbon dioxide and global temperature, and there's other research to show that causation. But there is room, when you look at a chart like this, there's room for some ambiguity, which is why some people can deny it. I'm not denying it, believe me. But this identifying correlation versus causation is always very tricky, and it's always very debatable. So it's something to look at carefully when you see two things correlated, and to understand whether they're causing each other or not. So that brings me to evaluating an author's reasoning, which is what you'll be doing in your rhetorical analysis essay next week. So first of all, deductive reasoning, we've talked about that yesterday. Is it valid and true? That's what you're looking for. For inductive reasoning, you want to look at the sample. Is the sample size large enough? If you remember that health study, the sample size was not very big, so it wasn't large enough. Is it representative enough? And what that means, and this covers this in the book, is it showing the diversity of the group? Does it represent the group correctly? Okay. Are there other examples that the author maybe hasn't thought of? Are there counter examples that you might use to sort of show that the author needs to consider some other things? All right, so that's it. You have got a discussion post to do to practice rhetorical analysis, evaluating the reasoning of an author, and I'll be excited to see what you come up with. And that will be your last task for the week, so have a wonderful weekend.